And so the long-awaited resurrection of one of PC gaming's most vaunted franchises has finally come to pass. But much has changed since the Lord of Terror was still a mere twinkle in Blizzard North's eyes. Awakening from a prodigious 11-year development cycle under the stewardship of new masters, Diablo III emerges from the fires of hell clearly a different beast than ever before. But is this slimmer and sleeker package still as sinfully good as action RPG aficionados remember?
The world must be told of the coming darkness.
12 years after Diablo and his ilk were purged from the dark corners of Sanctuary, a mysterious star crash lands upon the rickety borders of New Tristram, setting into motion the events that would once again bring mankind's greatest champions up against the primevals of hell. Writ large in trailer-ready verbiage and ceaselessly charged quips, Diablo III presents Blizzard's storytelling at its bombastic best. A headstrong, well-crafted, and well-acted production afflicted only by undercooked chunks of story and the occasional streaks of cheese that seem to so frequently come with the epic tone Blizzard's lore masters are so fond of. At least as far as the central plot is concerned.
That's a long and terrible story that you wouldn't want to hear.
Surprisingly enough, Diablo III's strongest moments are the ones hidden beneath the bluster of the main campaign. From the happenstance banter of townfolk to the back-and-forth conversations between you and your faithful NPC companions, the game exerts some impressive world-building through clever writing and thoughtfully placed interactions with these seemingly incidental characters. The dark and dreary world of Sanctuary feels all the more real as a result, and it's hard not to keep an open ear to some of the more well-developed side stories and audio logs liberally strewn along the path. You might even catch yourself caring more about some of these unfortunate souls than the ones laid bare before you in the meticulously produced cinematics.
If these translations are correct, the armies of light and shadow will clash across the fields of eternity.
Past its gloriously overdone fight scenes and predictable Scooby-Doo style betrayals, what noticeably sticks out most in this decidedly less dark iteration of Diablo is a radical shift away from the stringent and often punishing aspects of the series' past.
My eye will fall on them and discover their heinous, treasonous plans as well.
Gone are the stat point allocations, talent trees, and item identification scrolls that have for so long been the cornerstones of the series' complex feel. What's left is a game that may seem a fair deal simpler, but one that still makes choice feel meaningful. Right from the get-go, it's clear that the game opens itself up to a more playful approach to experimentation. One needn't look further than the thoroughly redone rune system, which allows players to freely customize the secondary properties of their skills at any time, or the artisan system, which grants a means of regulating the types of gear and gems at their disposal, for proof that Diablo has moved on from its severe past. Soul-crushing difficulty modes accepted, of course.
There is no justice in murder.
At the beginning, however, the goings are simple enough. Diablo III readily preserves the series' kill, smash, and loot sensibilities across 4 mostly linear acts, filled with just enough randomized dungeons, world maps, and chance events to make each playthrough feel slightly different than the last. If scrutinized solely on the merit of its progression content, the game's unrelenting single-mindedness and conspicuously unresolved narrative threads leave something to be desired, especially for players expecting much more of an evolution from past games this time around. That said, it isn't until reaching Nightmare Mode that Diablo III begins to show more of its diabolical hand. Once the training wheels of normal difficulty rock off, it's an entirely new ballgame.
How satisfying.
Thanks to a general increase in mob counts, life totals, and damage numbers, the harder difficulty settings in Diablo III require a brutal awareness of the game's finer points. In time, it becomes much less about vanquishing the prime evils than eliminating all imperfections from your character build. The true game rests on a ceaseless cycle of trial and error, optimization and upgrades, and a constant adaptation to the insidious, randomly generated evils that it throws your way. Elite spawns wear their modifiers like grotesque badges of honor, and you'll know precisely if it's time to fight or flee with some of the more maliciously configured ones out there. The mere act of surviving feels like an accomplishment. Unsurprisingly enough, it all comes back to the loot game in the end. Determining where you stand in the pecking order and making the necessary item acquisitions and rune adjustments to progress even further is still very much part of the game's intoxicating drive. But as such, it also becomes a bit contradictory to the series' newfound open-ended nature, with a rigid focus on stats and gear. The bigger and badder monsters of Nightmare and beyond seem artificially tuned to increased gear levels rather than player skill, ultimately making a substantial portion of your efforts all about clearing a checkpoint of equipment, rather than coming upon any particular revelations in tactics or ability loadouts. The series' experimental dabble in in-game auction houses, both with fictional gold and real-life dollars, has proven to be a worthwhile feature thus far by taking away some of the burden of gambling time and effort on waiting for an upgrade to drop. At press time, however, the real money auction has yet to be implemented. In terms of the game's other primary features, Hardcore Mode provides a merciless venue for players to flex their best survival skills, while a customizable cosmetic banner option injects a personal touch unique to each player in place of avatar options. Newly implemented achievements flood the senses with a constant barometer of your progress, and the streamlined process of finding and joining games is joyfully effortless. The only thing missing from this jamboree is PvP, which is due in the indeterminate future through a content patch. While there may be more than enough game to sift through without it, it definitely comes as a sizable setback for those expecting to round up a stack of ears at launch.
For all that is holy!
I feast on their agonies, their eternal anguish.
While the inclusion of an MMO-style skill bar and a retuned potion belt stand out as some particularly big changes from previous games, the series' click-happy, spam-friendly formula for success remains blissfully intact, and there are yet more substantial additions still. More than anything, it's the classes that truly define the Diablo experience, and they're the best realized the series has seen yet.
Thank you for saving me.
Save for the strapping barbarian, the character classes in Diablo III bring an eclectic mix of new blood to the table, though they do riff off of familiar motifs from the heroes of past. The wizard and witch doctor, for instance, recall shades of sorcerer and necromancer respectively in their arcane mischief out on the battlefield. But to call them carbon copies would be giving the imaginative flourishes poured into each class short shrift. The time-bending, form-manipulating, and volatile conjurations rendered by these mystic dynamos bring bold new tactics to the game. The monk, meanwhile, places its own spin on the tank healing template set by its ancestor, the Diablo II paladin, with a highly mobile and defensive style of battle, complemented by the cunning killing arts of the demon hunter, who brings the best of the Amazon and assassin to life with a lethal loadout of magically tinged gadgets.
The scent of battle saturates the air.
The wide repertoire of laser beams, melee slashes, skill shots, and utility skills at your disposal provide a thrilling toy box of destruction to lay waste with. And it gets more intriguing still once crazy, unconventional builds and subtle rune alterations factor into play. Suffice to say, combat remains unperturbed as one of the core strengths of the series, feeling no less potent, tense, or tactile in all its simple savagery more than a decade later.
Do you smell that?
The falling star struck the town of Tristram. The dead rose in its wake.
Though it's noticeably taken some liberties with the series' dolorous hues and somber crypts, the reports of an aesthetically dumbed-down Diablo have been greatly exaggerated. Here is a dark game that lavishes its flush of colors with cocksure swagger, resulting in a striking and painterly look that skillfully reflects the game's artistic ambitions. A sophisticated physics system adds veritable impact and realism to each carefully placed blow, while the tastefully done spell effects endow each skill with distinct flair and presence out on the battlefield. It all comes together in a tight and arresting package that surprisingly manages to stay legible even in the midst of the most chaotic engagements. You'd be wrong-headed to call out Diablo III on being too bright, but to call it unimpressive would be downright foolish.
The true vision of the Lord of Hell!
As expected, the sound and cinematics department deliver the gusto with a chilling soundtrack, as well as world-class cutscenes that continue to lead the rest of the industry by the nose. The game's voice actors should also be commended for giving their all with excellent performances throughout, especially considering some of the hammy dialogue that they've had to endure.
You do believe me, don't you, Leah?
Let the games begin.
While Diablo III's fundamental flaws are few, they certainly bear mentioning. Some of the series' less desirable design aspects seem stubbornly set in their ways, and for a lot of folks, the continuous online DRM requirement is a clear-cut deal-breaker no matter how many ways you slice it. Even so, with an immersive world, crisp combat, and a venomous gameplay hook that refuses to let up, Diablo III delivers a slick revitalization of the action RPG, even if it isn't a complete reinvention of it. If you've yet to repent for your grubby loot-hoarding ways, consider this your next guilty indulgence.
It has begun.